Oh, all right, folks. I am so excited for today because I am going to be teaching you how to make this beautiful, delicious, nutritious hot compost for your garden beds to be feeding your plant babies. And the best part is all of it is completely for free. Hey folks, it's Jordan from Mind and Soil here, where we're looking to introduce 1 million individuals to gardening's mental health benefits. So if you want to feel more peace, more joy, more restoration, then go ahead and subscribe and come grow with us. Plus, you'll get to see the structures that I build to keep the sun out of my face while I'm trying to record here. So about 1.5 years ago, I set out trying to build a hot compost pile because I knew how good it was for the garden and how amazing it is for our plant babies. It's absolutely jam-packed with nutrients for them to be growing nice and big from, and then it's also got all the microbes to keep them really, really healthy, and it's removing from the waste cycle, which was totally amazing. Everything here is completely for free that could have potentially ended up at a landfill. So I set out to start building this, but what I found was that I was watching hours and hours of videos, and then it ended up taking me about 2 to 3 different piles to actually build the first hot compost pile that heated up to 120 Fahrenheit, which is thermophilic. And so what I'm hoping to do with this video is take my 18 months of learnings and consolidate it all into one step-by-step guide for you to successfully build a hot compost pile in your very first try. And I've had a couple of friends that have tried it out now and that I've kind of tested and sampled it with, and they have all successfully been able to build a hot compost pile. So I'm very confident that if you follow each of the steps, it will work for you. It is going to be a little bit of a longer video, so I encourage you to grab a drink, grab a snack, kick back and relax, hit pause right now, go grab those things, and then come back and let's get started again, and we'll get kicked off with step number 1. So step number 1 is all around collecting the materials that we need to build our hot compost pile. And so what goes into the hot compost pile are 4 key ingredients, and that is carbon materials, nitrogen materials, water, and oxygen. Water and oxygen, those are fairly straightforward, so let's talk a little bit about carbon and nitrogen. There's a big gust of wind coming through. I hope my shade structure doesn't fall down on me. So nitrogen materials are kind of like our fuel source, and they are what's going to heat the pile up. So we need to have a lot of nitrogen materials in there. What exactly are nitrogen materials? Well, those would be grass clippings, those would be yard waste, such as things that we pull out of our garden, kitchen waste, coffee grounds, and then the manures, so cow poop, horse poop, chicken poop, those are all really good nitrogen sources. So we need to amass a very large quantity of these to get started. Now, if we had a pile that was just nitrogen materials, it would ultimately burn our plants. So we need to balance that out with our carbon materials, and those are our kind of what we would call bulking materials. And what are some of the common carbon materials? Those would be something like leaves that we would be able to rake up into big bags and bring back to our house. Those would be cardboard, newspaper, those are another couple of options, as well as potentially wood chips or sawdust, and even some old soil you could use as a bulking and carbon material in your beds. So those are the 2 kind of critical pieces on top of water and oxygen. And some people, they focus on, oh, you need to have this ratio of carbon to nitrogen and have it all balanced out. And I don't want you to focus on that at all. The only thing that I want you to focus on is amassing a significant amount of the 2, because it's the volume, the overall volume, that really matters. And so on that front, the size of the pile that we want to build needs to be 4 foot by 4 foot by 4 foot. And so in this very first step, it's very likely that you don't have sufficient materials at your house. That's the case for me. And so what I do is I go to the local community garden here in the town that I live in, and they let me bring a whole bunch of the green waste that they have from their community gardens back to my house. And then I go over to the cafe, and they allow me to collect a whole bunch of coffee grounds from them in big 5-gallon pails that I bring back to my house. And then I'll go around and I'll rake up a whole bunch of leaves, and I'll bring all those leaves back to my house. So this first step, it's really so critical because we need to get enough material to have that 4 foot by 4 foot by 4 foot size. And if we do that, then you're well on your way to getting a hot compost pile going. So I really encourage you to get a little bit creative with finding where you can get these organic materials. And if you do step one properly here, then I guarantee you, you are on the right path and you're going to have a hot compost pile. So the other part of materials is what doesn't go into the pile, but we're still going to want to have on hand. And so a few of these include a thermometer. So this is going to show us the temperature of the pile and ensure that it's heating up. Next one is a pitchfork. And we're going to want this because that's what we're going to use to flip the pile to introduce new oxygen into it. And then on top of that, we want to have right here a tarp. And this tarp we're going to put over top of the pile because that third or fourth key ingredient is water, and that tarp is going to keep steam in as well as rain out. So it's going to create a really nice and consistent water level in there, which we're going to be looking for. So those are the pieces that we'd like to have on hand on top of the raw materials, our carbon, our nitrogen, our water, and our oxygen sources. Now that we've got those all collected, let's dive into step number 2. So step 2 is all focused on preparing the materials to build our pile. And all that I mean by this is just a little bit of us breaking the materials down so that they're in as fine and small of pieces as possible. So there's 2 reasons why we want to break down our materials before building the pile. The first one is that it provides more surface area for the microbes to eat away on, and that is going to expedite the process and is going to give us finished compost in about 30 days. And the second piece is that when we have that now finished compost, it is going to be all set and all ready to move into our garden beds, and we don't need to be doing any sifting on it because we've broken the pieces down whereby everything is fairly uniform and consistent and can go straight into the garden beds. It's going to give you a really beautiful final product there. And so let's start with our carbon materials on this front. And like I mentioned, leaves are a great option. It's my favorite option to be using in my hot compost pile. And a way that I can go about breaking down these leaves into even finer and smaller pieces is by using a lawnmower. So all that I'm going to do with the lawnmower is just drive over top of them back and forth and let the blade cut those up into nice and small pieces. And now for our nitrogen materials, if we're using stuff like garden waste that there could be some larger stems and chunks in, then what we're going to be doing in this instance is using a hedge trimmer, if you have that on hand, to break them down. And it's kind of like carving a turkey, where you're just going to take the hedge trimmer and use it kind of going up and down on the pile of organic matter and garden waste that we have there. Once again, just trying to break it down into slightly smaller pieces. So now that we've broken down the material into smaller pieces, step 2 is all done. And with that, we're actually kind of into the back half of this, and we've done the bulk, the majority of the work. So step 3 is all around building the hot compost pile. And the way that we're going to go about doing this is by creating layers. And so what we're going to do is add a 4-inch layer of one of the materials, whether that's carbon or nitrogen, and then we're going to add some water, and then we're going to add the next layer 4 to 6 inches, and we're going to repeat that process until our pile is 4 foot by 4 foot by 4 foot. And so to get started, we're going to grab a bunch of nitrogen materials, and we're going to bring them over to where we're building our hot compost pile, and we're going to dump them out and then just spread them evenly across that area in kind of a 4 foot by 4 foot space. And again, we want that to be about 4 to 6 inches in height. And then we're going to add water. And the amount of moisture that we like to see here is similar to a wet sponge, where there's only kind of 1 or 2 drips of water coming out. We don't want it to be absolutely wringing out and dripping all kinds, and we don't want it to be so dry that there isn't any water coming out of it. And then we're going to grab our carbon materials, and we're going to bring those over. And then we're going to create a layer 4 to 6 inches of carbon materials, spread it out nice and evenly, and then we're going to add our water to get that next layer nice and moist. And we're going to repeat this process until we get the pile to 4 feet tall. So it just continues to go nitrogen layer, carbon layer, nitrogen layer, carbon layer, nitrogen layer, carbon layer. And that is the bulk of what we're doing in step 3 here. So a bonus tip here is that if you have some partially or mostly finished compost laying around, I really encourage you to put that into the middle, right as kind of a layer in the middle of the hot compost pile. And that is going to serve similar to kind of like a kombucha starter or a sourdough starter, where that partially or mostly finished compost, it is totally packed with all kinds of microbes that are going to kickstart the microbial breakdown process within this hot compost pile. So it's a really, really great way to kind of expedite the whole process and kick it off. So we have got our hot compost pile to now 4 foot by 4 foot by 4 foot. And I so encourage you, if it hasn't quite gotten there, if you're sitting closer to 3 foot by 3 foot by 3 foot, to really just go that extra mile, because you've gotten it like 90% there to give yourself a really high likelihood of success. Give it that extra 10% of kind of materials so that it is as close as possible to 4 foot by 4 foot by 4 foot. And that once again is going to give you the highest likelihood of having this pile get really, really nice and hot, and you then having beautiful compost to put onto your plant babies. So now that the pile is built and it's 4 foot by 4 foot by 4 foot, we are ready to move on to step 4. And with step 4, all that we're doing is thermostat, tarp, and tracking. So we're going to put the thermostat into the pile so that we can get an initial feel for what the temperature is on the pile. And then what we're going to do is we're going to put that tarp over top of the pile, and this is going to ensure that we are able to keep the moisture level really nice and consistent in there. No rain getting in, and all the steam is actually just kind of serving as a buffer within the pile. And then each day we are going to track the temperature of the pile to see whether or not it is heating up. And this I totally geek out on. I think it's so much fun, and I make graphs of it each and every time. So let's take a look at this pile that we just built and what that journey looked like for it over the course of the last 30 days. Day 1, when we built this hot compost pile and we put the thermostat into it, the initial temperature on the pile was just over 60 Fahrenheit, which really is not all that warm. And so then the next day I came back out 24 hours later to take the temperature, see what it's at, and it had climbed to now 86 Fahrenheit. So in one day it got 24 degrees warmer. The next day, day 3, it had climbed all the way up to 115, and it continued day 4 up to 132. And so at about 120 Fahrenheit, this is where the pile becomes what's called thermophilic. And there's 2 things that happen at 120 Fahrenheit. 1, any of the bad pests, pathogens, diseases that could be in there, they begin to burn off. And then 2, some of the seeds that are in the pile in that area that's 120 Fahrenheit, they begin to burn out so that they aren't going to turn in and start to grow when you start to put that compost into your garden beds. So breaking 120 is a really, really exciting thing to do. And so this pile is now up to 132, and it continued up to 136 Fahrenheit. But then it plateaued. And the next day it actually dropped down to 132. So my hot compost pile was starting to cool down. What's happening in there? Well, let's go back to the very beginning and remember, what are the 4 pieces that are important to our hot compost pile? We need nitrogen materials, which we clearly have because it's heating up so much. We need carbon materials, which we know we put in there. We needed that water, which we sprayed onto it, and it needs oxygen. And so what's happened here is that the microbes, they've been hard at work in that hot compost pile, eating away at things, and that microbial activity is what has driven the temperature up. But now they're out of oxygen, so they can't keep on working, which is why we see the pile starting to cool off. And so that means that we are ready for step number 5 here. And just before we dive into the 5th and final step of this, if you've made it this far and you're enjoying this video, I would absolutely love for you to give us a like, because that helps us get in front of new gardeners that may not have experienced the mental health benefits of gardening and that the gardening can bring. So give us a like and continue to grow with us and get us in front of new gardeners. So step number 5 is all around introducing new oxygen to this pile, and that we are going to do by flipping it. So step 5 is flipping the pile. And all that we need to do for this is basically take that pitchfork that we had and move the pile over 3 feet. And so this is going to be kind of flipping the pile, mixing all those materials up nicely so they're all uniformly broken down and consistent. But it's also introducing tons of new oxygen into the pile so that those microbes have the oxygen that they need to continue to stay busy at work breaking down all of the organic material in there. So we simply shovel the whole pile over about 3 feet until it is rebuilt into, what's probably now a 3 foot by 3 foot by 3 foot pile, because it's consolidated and broken down so much over the course of the first 4 to 5 days here. And then once we've done that, we throw the thermometer back in it, we put the tarp over top, and we allow it to just continue to cook and heat up and do its thing. So what you're going to notice happens, big wind blast coming through, is that your hot compost pile, when you flip it, is going to drop about 20 Fahrenheit. And don't be surprised if this happens at all. That's just because the temperature outside is significantly cooler than 130 plus Fahrenheit where it is in the pile. And so what you'll notice once you flip the pile is within 24 hours, it's usually recouped that 20 Fahrenheit. But now it's also got all the oxygen to go even higher than that. And on the third day after flipping it, it went all the way up to 148 Fahrenheit. And then it started to taper off again to 146, 140, and then back down to around 132. And so once again, the pile had ran out of oxygen, totally expected and normal. And that means that, again, about 4 to 5 days later, we want to do our second flip on this pile to get new oxygen introduced for the microbes to continue working away. Now for myself, I actually only flip my hot compost pile twice. And so those 2 flips that we just did, that's the extent of the flipping it that I'll do. And the reason behind that is because what I have found is that after that second flip, any subsequent flips that we do, there isn't enough fresh nitrogen material for there to be a big boost in the temperature and for it to go even higher towards kind of like in the mid 150s and potentially up to 160. So 2 flips I have found to be completely sufficient. So this pile, it is right around day 30. And what we're looking at here is really beautiful finished compost. I could go and take this, put this into my garden beds right now if I wanted to. So within 30 days, you've got finished compost for use. For myself, I like to wait just a little bit longer. I'm gonna probably give it about 2 months of just sitting there, continuing to cool, continue to decompose, continuing for the microbes just to hang out, reproduce, and break down that material even further. And so because of that, I like to look at my hot compost as a bit of a 90-day period. From building it to finishing cooking is the first 30 days, and then about 60 days of just cooling. And so what that means is that anytime that I'm looking to apply hot compost into my beds, I give it about 90 days to work backwards from. And so this pile we started in mid-July. By mid-August, which is when it is right now, it has finished cooking. And now we go to mid-September, mid-October, that's the end of the 90 days. And that's right when I will be closing my garden beds for the winter time. And it's at that time that I always like to get a little bit of fresh compost into them just to hang out over the course of the winter there. And then I'll do the same thing come spring as we're going into the season. So with those 5 steps, you will be able to build your very own hot compost pile. I would absolutely love for you to share with me the successes that you have in doing it. And if you have any questions on how to go about doing it, please drop those into the comments. I will respond to each and every one of them. And I cannot wait to see and hear how it goes for you. I really hope this has helped you feel a little bit more comfortable and a little bit more confident in the garden. Go get those hands dirty, give it a try, let us know how it goes, and I'll catch you on the next one.